welcome to the MSL Lead Chronicles. It's a podcast on a mission in medical affairs and leadership. I'm Mary Morton, and along with my buddy, Chad Fellers, we're going to have casual talk about important topics and challenges in leadership. So whether you want to elevate or further develop as a leader, or your ambition is to transition to a leadership role, you've tuned into the right podcast, and we are so glad you're here. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to another episode of MSL Lead Chronicles, where leaders learn from leaders. I'm your host, Chad Fellers, and I'm joined by my partner in crime, Mary the Magnificent Morton. We're excited about our topic today, but first, we want to say thank you to those who shared feedback on our last episode that discussed transitioning from individual contributor to leader. If you haven't had the opportunity to listen, please be sure to download from Apple, Spotify, your favorite listening source. Now, let's get into today's discussion, and I'm going to turn it over for Mary to kick things off.
All right, great. Thanks, Chad. First, I want to mention on this day that we're recording, today is Chad's birthday. I knew you were going to be like that. So happy birthday, Chad. Woo!
Thank you, Mary. I will pay you back shortly, I'm sure.
So as you guys know, our goal is to create a community where leaders can learn from and share ideas with other leaders in the pharmaceutical and biotech world. Today we are so stoked to have a special guest with us to help dig into this topic of psychological safety. So let me tell you a little bit about our guest. She has almost 20 years of field medical experience, having worked for large companies, medium-sized companies, small companies. She moved into her first leadership role. I believe it was with Vertex, but she can correct me if I was wrong. And she's continued to inspire ever since. I've actually heard from a couple of people who have worked for her over the past decade that she is the absolute best manager they've ever had. And including that, she's built out tremendously exciting teams to launch really cool products, including the first ever gene therapy that was used to treat Duchenne muscular dystrophy, so for Sarepta Therapeutics. So please welcome the amazing and beautiful Deanna Tucker.
Y'all are so nice. Wow. It's like I need to come here every single day. No, but thank you so much. It is an honor to be here with both of you. I just am real excited about this podcast and what you all are doing for MSL leaders. It's definitely something that is needed in the space. I think one of the great things about your last podcast on MSL, the MSL leader, is that there's no book on how we go from being an MSL to an MSL leader. And sometimes you feel like you're out there on an island kind of by yourself, figuring things out. And hopefully you're not, detracting from the awesome team that you have. So I really am excited that y'all are doing this podcast. And it's really an honor for me to be asked to join you all. So I'm excited.
Yay, well, let's see how excited you are. If you watch the show, you know I'm going to kick it off by asking you to tell us something interesting about you that very few or nobody knows.
Wow. It's funny. I was thinking about this a couple of months ago whenever we were doing a team building event. And one of the things that I shared was years ago when I graduated from high school and then went to college, my original degree was not pharmacy. I thought about pharmacy, but I wasn't sure how I was going to go about that. So my original degree was broadcast journalism.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that crazy?
I
So
can
now it's
see
like,
it.
you could? Oh my gosh. And so I remember being in my first year of college and thinking, this isn't really for me. I loved journalism from high school, but the whole broadcasting part and doing that in college for real life, I was like, yeah, we're not going to do that. So fortunately, I leaned on pharmacy and did that.
But you're still doing public speaking though in ways too
Yeah,
with
yeah.
right? So you are leveraging that experience. But I need to go back first, Deanna. So you said, or when this awesome intro that Mary gave, which Mary, I can't wait till one day you flower me with that kind of those kind of compliments. We've known each other for 4 or 5 years, and so I don't know if that's ever going to come, but if it does, that'd be great. But 20 years, Deanna, I don't. Where are you from? Because did they not enforce child labor laws? 20 years? That's a long
It's all
time.
the filters on the Zoom visual effects. Yeah, like 20 years. It's hard to believe. But 2004. Um, yeah, in
Fantastic. Well,
Oklahoma.
I know the industry is grateful to have you, and I would echo the things. We have some, obviously, we have some people in common that we've both had a chance to lead, and they have nothing but glowing things to say about your style, and so can't wait. Part of that is the psychological safety, the environment that you created for your team, and so I know that you're going to bring some great information for our audience to be able to take away and put into practice, whether they're leading in an official capacity or they're aspiring to do that or leading from where they are in their current roles. So really looking forward to this.
Awesome. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
So I'll just jump in and kind of, for anybody who's watching or listening and they're like, psychological safety, I don't really know that term. You probably have heard the term, well, the speak up culture. Psychological safety kind of encompasses that, but a lot of other things. So, psychological safety is the belief that one should feel secure rather than punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas or questions or concerns or sharing mistakes that they've made. If you saw our little teaser earlier this week where I referenced a couple of people, including Kierkegaard, as well as Amy Edmondson, her book, The Fearless Organization, and a number of books since have really addressed this. We'll get into a little bit more of that, but I guess let me just pass the torch over here to Chad and our promised takeaways. Are you gonna
So,
about our
well,
pretty
actually,
guest?
I'm throwing it to our co-host, our guest, Deanna, since we are leveraging her 20 plus years of experience, we know that she's got some great things to share. So, Deanna, I'm gonna put you on the spot. Do you have some takeaways for our listeners?
I do. And honestly, I hadn't heard of the term psychological safety. So whenever you all were talking about this as a topic, I thought, I think I know what that means, but I'm not sure. And so I guess, whenever I think about whenever you have a team, you're on a team call. Obviously, one of the best benefits of having this diverse team is to tap into all of the knowledge and all of the thoughts and perspectives. Now, not everybody feels confident because maybe they're brand new on an established team. You're like, well, if I bring that up, what am I going to do? But as I started thinking about what are the top 2 or 3 takeaways if I'm describing psychological safety, and it's really how do you create an environment that is really more of a, you join a call, you're there with your teammates and your peers that we're really here to learn. And so if you go from that standpoint of having that learning capacity, we're here to learn something new. Everybody is coming to the team call with a different perspective. And so how do we tap into those perspectives and ensure that our environment is one to get people to talk? I think also setting expectations, whether you have just one leader or you have the leader and some regional leaders, is really setting the expectations of, hey, we've got this awesome training call coming up. Would really like to make sure that you guys have questions ready. Maybe you need to send out some of the slides so that people know what's going to be shown. Like I'm one of those persons, if I'm seeing data or a topic for the first time, I'm a processor. I'm not someone who can read and immediately start thinking of ideas and thoughts. I have to let it soak and marinate a little bit. And I think also is to create an environment where people are intellectually curious, approach things that way. Like, no one expects you to be an expert whenever you're hearing things for the first, second, or third time. One of the great things is, I think as adult learners, we try to say, okay, you've read this article one time, you should know it and be able to recall it. And that's really not true. One of my college professors said that you had to hear something upwards of 10, 15, 20 times before your mind could recall it factually, which made me feel really good because I think I need something repeated 15 times, plus have some post-it notes. So that's kind of some of the things that I was thinking about as far as what are the takeaways for creating that psychological safety that we want with our teams.
That's great. I can't wait for us to get into all three of those. Before we do that, let's talk about what's the end game of having a culture of psychological safety. So I'm going to kind of lean on Amy Edmondson on this, but the benefits, the end game is you've increased the participation of the people on your team to share ideas. You're increasing the likelihood that there's going to be some innovation, and increase productivity because happy people are more productive. And if they feel a part of it, I mean, obviously that's going to help. It creates the ability to learn from your mistakes. That's one of the things, we say, when you're not in that culture of psychological safety, not only is it like the end of the world if you're making a mistake, you don't want anybody to know. Therefore, you can't have the opportunity to ask for help or, like say, to learn from what happened. And then retention of your team, because if they feel someplace that they're safe, why would they want to leave? So,
Yeah.
So, and kind of getting into establishing that environment that is learning in nature. I love that. So, actually, Chad, I'm going to pick on you first. So, what do you think is one of the key things that's important to setting that up from the very beginning?
So I think this ties into a couple things. One is the whole servant leadership model that we talk about, right? I think we've talking about assuming positive intent, active listening. Some of those are the key things. Listening or seeking to understand. One of the components too is creating a sense of ownership. And I think one of the things where we often make mistakes is we have a top-down approach versus a bottom up. And if we can leverage the talent that we have around us and our team, like we spend hours and hours and hours trying to hire the best people to really make an impact on our team. Why in the world would we then tell them and put them in a box to be able to come up with certain things versus giving them concepts, giving them direction and letting them do that? If you create the ownership, again, it really aligns with what Amy talks about here, right? I mean, the innovation comes as a result of it. Productivity comes. And I think part of it is if I can celebrate the success of even the ideas that are put forward, regardless if they don't pan out like we would hope, that creates that environment, that creates the drive to want to do this instead of feeling this responsibility that's pushed down from headquarters that we need to do this next initiative without understanding the why behind it. If we can incorporate that with our team to help lead that conversation, they're going to want to stay around. They're going to want to be able to contribute because they feel like they're making a difference for the company and not just creating or just providing a message, a standardized message that goes out with no return too. So I think that those are a couple of the ways that I try to really do is just create opportunities for ownership and to be able to celebrate those things regardless of the impact that they have. And I will take ownership if things don't turn out the way that we anticipated that to the leadership. I'll shelter my team once they see that they want to continue to produce new and more innovative ideas. So that's a couple of thoughts from my perspective. But what about you, Deanna?
As you're talking about this, there's a book called Multipliers that kind of speaks to, the fact that, like you said, you spend so much time finding these brilliant candidates to fill your positions on your team, whether it's a backfill or you're creating a new team. You look at all the remarkable work that they've done in their career. Maybe it was part of their residency, their postdoc work, or whatever it is, and you see all these transferable skills. And in the book, The Multipliers, it really talks about how companies don't tap into all of that goodness that is in somebody. You're just using them here. So I agree with you. You're going to have, most MSL teams are teams full of highly talented, deeply scientific people. And their skill level goes above being able to communicate science. It goes through, I don't consider myself a terribly innovative person, but working with innovative people almost gets me thinking more, about innovation. It's like, wow, I wouldn't have thought about that. And I think whenever you do have the freedom to let your brain just kind of run with things, like one of the things I've done before, and I'm sure you've done this too, Chad, is your MSLs to have little niche or subject matter expert areas within your team. And it really allows them, to just kind of take it and run with it. And that's what I love is whenever someone is like, okay, I'm going to be the point person for competitive intelligence. And then you don't even really have to give them that many guardrails, but they just kind of run with it. And they're like, this is how I wanted, and that's a thing of beauty. It's very innovative. It's very relevant to the team. And, just creating that environment of like, how do you want this to run, and giving them the autonomy to do it, I think is, and, so those are some of the things that were going through my mind as you were describing that is, really allowing for people to use so many of the skills, whether it has anything to do with field medical, but it has to do with how can you optimize the process or make something better.
I love it. What do you think, Mary?
No, I agree with everything that you said. I was actually starting to think about another question that I have, but I feel like it for you guys actually works really well for the second takeaway. So if it's okay if I just skip to that. So your
Perfect.
second takeaway was setting the expectation that we need you to speak up. So I know Chad, you have, and I'm sure Deanna, you have as well. So taken a leadership role in a company where there were people already in place, and they worked for a different leader at that time, and maybe they're 180 degrees from you, and they don't know what to expect, and maybe they're intimidated from you walking in the door from day one. So how do you encourage them to take advantage of a speak up culture when they don't even know who you are and you didn't hire them? So, I mean, Deanna, why don't you start with that?
That one's tough because it kind of reminds me of when an MSL becomes the MSL team leader, because one day you're peers and then the next day you're now their boss to some degree. And that has a lot of things attached to it. But if you're brand new to an organization and you want to create this environment. I think that one of the first things that you have to do is you have to listen. Like, you've got to meet with a lot of individuals. You've got to really get on your active listening and understand what the organization is like, what has been the past experiences of the team, what are the current experiences of the team. You've got to do a little bit of investigation, so that you can really understand what things are working really well, so that you can continue those and maybe optimize those. And then what are some of the things that aren't working as well, that might be keeping people really close to the chest? Has anything else been tried? Was it a certain individual? What were the team dynamics? So I think that coming into an organization, you have to really put your active listening skills to the test and understand what's going on there.
She stole your answer, didn't she?
Yeah, pretty much.
ChatGPT, active listening.
Yeah, active listening. I couldn't agree. I couldn't agree more. I think even when we go back to even the servant leadership model, right? Part of a leadership or thing that I want to do is I want to grant trust to my team. But the reality is, coming into a role where there's previous leadership that you're not familiar with, or they're no longer there for whatever reason. We don't know the experiences that that team has had with them. And so we have to earn their trust. And so what are ways that we can do it? Active listening is one, empathize or showing empathy, asking for their feedback, right? What do you think would make this team more successful? If you could change something right now, what would it be?
Mhm.
And it's not as much as that we have to implement what's been suggested to us, but it's just the fact that we hear and we acknowledge and we think. And if we go back to say, yes, let's try this, or if there's any way to do that, that helps solidify some of those things. It's like deposits in a bank, if you will. Instead of asking and withdrawing all the time, if you don't have any of that resource available, I mean, your check's going to bounce or whatever. You're not going to be able to get what it is that you're trying to purchase. You have to continue to do those deposits. And so I think and those things take time. So I think that that's certainly top of mind when I've gone into new organizations, because you don't know, you have all different types of personalities and experiences, and it's important to validate those whenever possible.
So if you
I
talk
agree.
to them, if you talk to the team to try to get feedback from them, and let's say half of them say this is wrong, and the other half is saying something completely different, and you can't please all the people all the time, as they say. So how do you kind of figure out? Because they have to understand, I guess, at some point that I want your input, but I may not be able to implement all of your suggestions or ideas, and how you manage through that without crushing their spirit, because you asked them to speak up and then you didn't act on what they suggested. I mean, how do you kind of softly manage through something like that?
I think,
First,
Ladies first.
I was going to say, like, in the spirit of sharing ideas, one thing that what you could ask, like, if you're not sure if that idea is possible, is ask the individual, how would you go about implementing this, and help them talk through the processes, especially if you're new at a company and maybe you don't have a firm understanding of a lot of the processes. Like, how can this work? Is there components of their idea that you can implement? Maybe you can't implement 100% of it, but you can take one idea and be like, I could see where this would work right now. Let's take that and run with it, even if you can't get it all. And I'm a firm believer, if you give people the true reason and the rationale for why they had a great idea, but you just aren't able to implement it right now, sometimes it's just a timing thing. Sometimes it's a bandwidth thing. But I think if you are just open and honest and just say, I love your idea, but right now, compliance has an issue with that, or IT has an issue with that. And so the person still feels heard, and there's a valid reason maybe why their idea wasn't fully put into practice there.
Yeah, I love that. I like the idea, even in this scenario, if the idea is not ideal for where you want to take them as a leadership, I think one of the things, um, the reality is all these things require intention and they require time. And how do you manage that type of time? I would say your employee, your team is your greatest asset and resource. So we need to dedicate it to them to walk through some of these things. But one of the examples I think of is if there's an idea that's proposed that you know is probably not going to work, maybe it's asking questions to them, a broader question. Have you considered this? If your idea was implemented, what would you think? And then you could ask them the questions. That way they can come to the conclusion as well too, that, well, maybe this isn't the right direction to go. And to your point, Deanna, if you can incorporate some of it, they still can see a bigger picture of why it was just a hard and fast slam the door. You're keeping that environment open. And then I would say even it's celebrating that team member on a team call, or recognizing as well for their ideas and contributions as well too. Once others start experiencing that from their counterparts, they'll be more inclined, I think, to be able to share their ideas as well too, knowing that we're going to brag on our people and we're going to shelter them when we need to as well. So I love the comments that you made. Thanks for those.
Absolutely.
So I'm gonna have to ask a tough question here. And I'm not implying you guys have ever had to deal with this, but say maybe it's more of how would you handle this? So, say you've done everything right, you've laid the groundwork to have to foster this culture of psychological safety, but there's that one guy on the team that is a peer, like this person also reports to you, and then you've got somebody on your team speaks up with an idea, and that person's peer is like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, or don't embarrass yourself. I mean, but there, so it's not even that you as a leader is not setting this up. You've got somebody on your team that is shooting somebody down. I mean, how do you handle that?
So that is definitely interesting because, in your setting of there's a couple ways to go about it. So when you set expectations with your team or whoever, one of the first things is, you may not agree with an idea that is posed or a question that is posed, and let's still be supportive. And you go back to what you were always taught growing up. If you don't have anything nice to say, let's not say it. And then, like, if you're in the moment and it has happened, I think one of the first things to do is just to come in and say, you know what, actually, I think there's some really valid parts to this. And even if maybe you might think, yeah, it is kind of out there, find something that is going to say, I appreciate you speaking up, and I think you're on the right track here, because you're going to have to overcome what this peer has kind of really thrown a curveball into the whole situation. And so, to show that I'm still here, I want to hear things, and we're not this, that isn't allowed. And then whenever you get off the call, I would definitely want to talk to that person and say, we're really trying to establish an environment here that is innovative, it is safe. And if we kind of shoot a missile through someone's idea, it's not really going to establish that conducive environment. So that one's tough.
Yeah, I don't know how to really navigate that in the moment, because you don't want to throw more gas on the fire or cause a different thing. I don't know. Maybe it's something around setting, um, just thinking about how, like, the reason why we do things. Let's even go back to that. Like, when we think about the patients that we serve, for example, like a lot of times we do these national field meetings from the companies, and they'll spotlight patients that reorient us to the why we're doing different things. Maybe it's something simple as showing the slide about here are the ground rules for this discussion around as we're brainstorming. We will do this. We will not tolerate, or we will accept all ideas for active discussion and feedback. We will not demoralize or things like that. If we can set those kind of ground rules to and reorient it, maybe that helps alleviate some of those pain points. Thankfully, I haven't experienced a lot of those, but I know that certainly can be something that many teams face. That maybe that's a practical way to try to spearhead a movement towards psychological safety.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, so obviously I'm working with hiring managers, and sometimes I have hiring managers say, I don't want to hire somebody who's spent 10 years at the same company. I mean, and that's the only company they've ever worked for, because they feel like they haven't been able to experience a diversity of thought. They've only learned one way. Have you guys, do you agree?
I'm going to say no. Now, I feel like when I was building out the last team that I led, you see 1,000 resumes and you're looking at a bunch of different things. There's certainly things that you kind of point out to yourself and think, okay, is this a red flag or whatever? I don't think I'm necessarily bothered by someone who's been at the same company for 10 or 15 years. I think in biotech, you don't see it very often because biotech, it's very hard to stay somewhere 10 years just because of the nature of it. Where I tend to see it is someone who's been at a very large company because it's so much easier to move around. If you're in scientific communications and you want something new, you could go over to medical information or something like that. So I have seen, and I mean, even back whenever I worked for a large company, this was 15 years ago. There are still some of those employees there that I worked with. Um, I don't know if it's for everybody. I think that depending on the environment that they're coming into, like if they've been at a really large pharmaceutical company for a long time and they're coming over to a biotech that has 200 people, I think it's on the hiring manager to say, here's the difference in those environments. It's not that it's a red flag, because I've seen many people be very successful making that leap. And I think too, is looking at that person's experience. What have they done in those 10 years? They may have moved around, they may have gone to different therapeutic areas. Which definitely requires you to think, have a different skill set to take on a new therapeutic area and become an expert at it. So I would definitely look at what have they been doing in 10 years? Because it could be the same experience as someone who's moved around a lot in biotech, because often biotech companies don't have multiple therapeutic, they don't have oncology plus, neurology plus cardiology. They're usually kind of based in one area.
I I feel like I'm just going to hit the repeat button. I think that I would agree with so many things, Deanna. I think, why would we pigeonhole ourselves or limit the talent pool by just saying, hey, anybody that does not have diverse experience beyond more than one company, why would we even ignore them? We don't. I would say perhaps they're very loyal, right? When I think about my loyalty to my team, I want to fight for them. I want the best and invest in their career trajectory. Maybe their key characteristic is loyalty within the company too. I also think that sometimes we have this notion, or there is this drive, that if you aren't advancing in your role or a different role um, uh, over your trajectory, that you're settling, or that you're not good enough to do that. I think we could flip it around, right? If a MSL had a new job every 18 months, well, why are they continuing to move as much? Is it because they're wanting new experiences and opportunity, or is it because they're not succeeding in their current role and so they have to find a way out because they can't cover the trail, right? I think it's incumbent on the hiring manager to ask questions to understand what's driving the behavior, whether it's staying here 10 years or they're changing every 3. So I definitely wouldn't limit myself by saying no to a candidate just because they have been with one company for so long.
Yeah, I agree. I
For the
agree.
record, that's not my opinion. That's not my opinion. I just want everybody to know that.
It's a valid question, though. It's
You
a
get
valid.
to ask questions that you don't even agree with. What is that, Mary?
I have hiring managers that say, I don't think this person can bring a diversity of thought to my team because they've only worked one place and they've only learned one way of doing things. I mean, have you ever seen the Brady Bunch movie? The Brady Bunch movie.
I have. I've seen all Brady Bunches, whether it's
But I mean the movie, like the remake thingy that came out, like with I can't remember who it was, but so the deal with Mike Brady, if you remember, if you're building a dentist's office, an office building, somebody's house, a football stadium, everything he put up looked like the Brady house. Do you remember in the movie?
Mhm. Yep.
And they felt like Mike Brady was a one-trick pony. Like,
Mhm.
and I have some clients say they take the same playbook everywhere they go. So they
Yeah.
never learn and adapt and do things differently because either they're not open minded or they haven't been exposed to working with other people so they can learn ideas, which is what, again, this, we talk about the innovation piece of psychological safety being so important. So I always think they call me the metaphor queen over here. So like, I just think of it as the Mike Brady house, the person who can't grow and innovate. So, but you know
Let's
me,
be clear, Mary. They call you lots of things. Maybe that's one of them, but you've been called lots of things. Let's go ahead. What's your next question?
Metaphor Mary, I love it. And I
how
love
does
that you hit
Ronnie
Brady
put up
Bunch.
with you is what I want to know.
I don't
Love you,
know.
Ronnie. You have wonderful patience.
Yeah.
So, so I this is actually very relevant to you guys. If we're talking about psychological safety across all jobs, all careers, all industries, or whatever, you guys are uniquely challenged because you have remote workers.
Mhm.
You can't sit in a room and do trust falls and stuff like that. I mean, you've got to. I mean, what do you think are some of like the special challenges that you guys deal with because you're not physically in the same room all the time?
I remember when COVID was happening and all of the traditional home office employees went home and then their life became, Zoom meetings, Teams meetings, whatever you had, WebEx meetings. And I remember the organization with the learning and development, they said, we need to talk about how to manage remote teams. And I thought, that's the only thing I've ever known. Like, my boss has rarely lived in the same state as me, much less, down the hall. Um, and I think from a field medical standpoint, that's kind of how we've always been. You've had people from all over. Oftentimes your team isn't able to all be in the same meeting because they're traveling. They've got, they're expected to be in the field. And then you also have to fight the multitasking, part of it. And I wish I could say that I had some fantastic thoughts about how to keep people engaged, but I think on a virtual space, you really have to limit the time that you're spending training because if you say you're on a training teleconference or you're going over some new data or you're preparing for an upcoming conference, if that call is an hour and a half or 2 hours long, we all know adult learners, it's not gonna sink in, whether they're going to start multitasking or whatnot. So I think you have to be very mindful of how long you're keeping people on a call. And if it's something that's going to take a lot more time, then I think you do have to figure out, maybe we should do a face-to-face meeting, where people can dedicate the time and focus in.
Well, that actually brings up a really interesting challenge, Deanna. It's like one of the things that they say, some people, it's even once the leader has said this, we want you to speak up, we want you to offer up ideas. Some people just don't.